have my producer in studio, my son Michael. He's a wizard at this stuff. But let me just see how many people are uh, are coming on. Let's see if that will show. Um, so anyway, let's see if it's chat live stream. There we are. Um, yeah, so I'll see if there's anybody's out there. Maybe nobody caught that, but if you did, that's all right. So we got a late start here. Well, thankful that you're on. Be sure to like and subscribe because usually people don't do that. Um, but it really helps us gets an idea of how we're growing and doing things like that. And so I'm grateful to be here, and I'm also excited about next week. Just to give you a heads up, we're going to be dealing with fear and how one relates to um, freedom in general, dealing with government and stuff like that. I'm going to deal with that whole mindset, and then especially dealing with IRS and where people are at. I want to help with that, and I'm going to have a special guest. I have a relatively new client came on last year, and she's just awesome. I think of her like a fireball, or she's like Abigail Adams. She would be a founding father's wife, and but she's a very strong woman. She's the kind of the prime mover in her family and all that. Of course, she's got a lot of history in that. We'll talk about that next time. That'll be next week if we're here and have a show. So and we'll broadcast that. So we'll put a link below, or we'll put a link at the end of this video for that video if you're not on it live. But so I'm looking forward to that. Um, but today, what I was saying earlier, I'm having to repeat, but if you weren't on already, we're talking about in any field, whenever you're mastering something, what you master is always the foundation. And so you can build upon that. You can build upon another's work and lay a good foundation in whatever category you're developing discipline in. And so, and then you can build upon that. And I've done that in my own life, and everybody does that in some capacity. I don't believe in the concept as a self-made man. There's no such thing. Nobody comes naked to the world and then they figure it all out on their own. There's no such thing as that. Every mover shaker has things they've learned from others that have gone before. So that whole thing of, self-made man is just a crock of crap. It doesn't acknowledge what they've learned and who they've learned from as they've come into mastering whatever they've done. So, so what I want to talk about tonight is really it kind of is going to go hand in hand with dealing with fear and those things next week. But I want to talk about the freedom movement in general and what it is in your area and what it is in my area and what you do when you're when we talk about freedom. That's very, very broad. When I talk about the freedom movement, I mean every area of liberty and freedom. You could have an interest in and has to be developed and grown and all that. Every subject matter. And when I say subject matter, what are we talking about? Freedom. We're talking about how about the history of freedom, at least in America or in any country where that war or agitation, like Frederick Douglass, where he says, um, you know, those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want the ocean without its awful roar of its waters. So the idea is that he says, "Let me give you a word on the philosophy of reform," and that it's August claims is based in struggle. If there's no struggle, there's no change or there's no growth. There has to be struggle if you're going to have growth. And so it's a really important thing. So when I talk about liberty and freedom, when I talk about freedom, we're talking about the work that you do within yourself. And some of that can be your religion or your faith, and how you develop that relationship with God, and how you develop and you create the life that you're living, that's a glory or an honor to your God, to yourself, to your family, your children, whatever your legacy is, your children's children, whatever that is. I mean, it's really quite profound when you really think about it. And I don't know if it was um, I don't know. Oh, it's Mark Twain that talks about the two most important days um, that you can acknowledge: the day you were born, and the day you determine what your purpose is. And if you're not living in your purpose, why you were created, why you were gifted with that breath to bring yourself, to be alive and to live this life that God has granted you life, then that's a thing to celebrate. And one of the things that helps me endure and deal with the troubles and the difficulties of life in whatever category that we may be talking about, is that I know that I'm doing exactly, let me qualify that. I was going to say, I know exactly, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Now, when I'm talking about this work of freedom, I am doing what I'm called to do, and I'm in that. Now, how well I perfect it and discipline it and all that, that's another matter. And I can't say that I'm so disciplined that I'm 24/7. I'm always doing what I'm supposed to be doing. God, I'm just not that disciplined. It's a struggle on this journey to do what I'm supposed to do all the time. And it's moment to moment, day by day. And it's a joy to be in that, at least to be aware that that's something that I'm in. And everything from how early, how late I stay up for whatever reason, at the end of my day, I'll tell you one of the reasons I don't go to bed on time, whatever that is. And it is because if I've had a good long day, or I've had a day that's been a lot of work, whether that's at home, taking care of our property or whatever it is, or being here at the office or on the phone a lot, or whatever the deal is, I when I get home, sometimes I just like to wind down and chill or do nothing or whatever, because usually my head is like full. And my lovely wife, she sometimes, if I'm laying down and my brain's running a mile a minute. Sometimes if I'm laying down and I'm not tired yet, I will be thinking about all the things that I need to do and I got to get done. So sometimes I stay awake until I'm so exhausted that when I lay down, I fall asleep. Now, I don't know if you have that, if that's something that you do, but that's a thing too. And so sometimes I'll go into, I'm in bed and I'm with my wife. And then sometimes one of the blessings that she does is that she'll put her hands on my head and she'll discharge the energy in my head, and she'll run it down my neck and all that stuff, whatever she does, quite magical. Um, and I can fall asleep right away. That's that's a blessing for that, but it's not always like that way. But if I go to bed or I stay up late, and if I stay up, I'll I have no problem getting up in the morning at all if I have things to do, whatever. So, I mean, there's times where I intentionally won't have something to do in the morning, and I'll sleep until I wake up. That usually won't go very late. It won't go beyond. I mean, if I go into to 9, I mean, if I'm exhausted, I may just sleep, whatever. I never would sleep into noon. If I'm if I'm this side at 10 o'clock in the morning, that would be considered really late. But typically up 7, 8 o'clock easily all the time. And many times if I got something to do early, I get up earlier. So even though I stay up late, I always will get up. I don't really like to sleep, and I'm sure sleep is necessary, but that's the thing. And so the idea of being in your purpose is significant. And if you don't know what your purpose is, um, and what that is, what you're bringing to mankind. Now, listen, that doesn't mean that what you're bringing is for the world. That's great if it is. Um, And it doesn't necessarily mean that what you're doing is bringing something to your country or your state or whatever, um, that it has to be that big. Sometimes it can be so significant of being the best you to raise children properly, or that you're making a difference in others' lives so that they may be building upon that and do something amazing and significant that people won't forget. I don't know. It's multifaceted, but everyone has an important purpose, and you get to figure out what that is. And if that's not a priority for you, you're wasting your life and your time. So when I talk about freedom, and I talk about the freedom movement, that's very broad. And when I look and think about the freedom movement, not only in America or in New Hampshire, where I'm at, or I think of the freedom movement as being worldwide, all mankind, because I have a kindred spirit with everyone on the planet that loves freedom and wants to pursue their happiness and to check government and hold them at bay. You can resonate with those people. That's one of the reasons I love going to Acapulco, or with the Dollar Vigilantes, the Anarchapulco, and next year it's going to be in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, because I get to be with people who love liberty. It's quite extraordinary. Man, it's almost dumped again. If this dumps again, I'm just going to record this, and I'm not going to broadcast it. We're just going to upload it. And I'm not really happy with our platform if it's doing that. Then again, it may be devices struggling to record. That's crazy. It's got to be this computer that's just crapping out, whatever it is. But hopefully it'll hang on there. It is buffering, so we'll see if it'll work out. But anyway, so what I wanted to mention was that is that the freedom movement is multifaceted, and what you do in it, find what is important to you or the thing that you favor, and then get busy doing it. It should be one thing. It's too broad for you to do everything to do with freedom, like you're a mall and you're doing it all. You won't be great at it. You'll be a jack of all trades, master of none. So I don't recommend it. I recommend you find something that you love about the freedom movement and get busy supporting it, doing it, being active in it, whatever that is. You'll be at your best, just like your body. The finger does what the finger does. It doesn't do what the foot does. And it's always serving us best. And it serves the foot by being the best finger it can be. So the idea is get good at what you do, and that'll be cool. So tonight I want to talk about two areas of freedom that I believe are universal, that that everybody should be participating in on some level, some of it in these two areas, and it may not be the same for every country in the world, but certainly America, and that is two things. The fully informed jury. So jury instruction is vital. I'll tell you in a minute why. And then to find and elect what they would call a constitutional sheriff. A sheriff is one of the highest law enforcement that actually is elected by the people. That's the value of a sheriff. He works directly. He's a representative in law enforcement. And so in your county, if you don't know who your sheriff is, if your sheriff, you don't have his cell phone number in your phone, then you're missing out on not only supporting, if the sheriff is a constitutional sheriff, he cares about that rights aren't violated in the county. And if knowing that person, if they're a profound person, the sheriff may be missing out on you, being that you are a freedom-minded person in some capacity. So those are the two areas that I think every freedom organization should support in your state. So I want to talk about those two things. And so let's first talk about the jury. Okay. In America, generally speaking, juries are selected from two types of databases: the voter, what they call the voter rolls, And then the driver's license. Many times, people are signing up to vote with their driver's license applications or what have you. But those databases. Now, there are more people than there. Let me say this: there are more people in America that don't vote um, than that vote. And I don't know if that's everywhere, but I know in my little town of 1,100, if they get 500 or 600, maybe 700 people in a presidential election, that's not a majority, my friends. So it's actually a minority that's moving, shaking the town, and who's going to be running it and such as that. So that's unfortunate. And listen, I get the apathy. Okay. And I want to encourage you not to, to not be apathetic, to be engaging. And that requires a certain mindset. Your neighbors and the people around you should know you as a freedom guy or gal. They should know that all you care about is freedom. And some people ignorantly will make reference to those concepts of like it's political. But politics and freedom are not the same thing. And in my opinion, politics covers up the conversations about freedom. Every single bill that a legislature is going to pass, whether that's in the Congress in Washington, that would be a U.S. congressman, or a legislator in your state would be a state rep. Every bill is a freedom bill and is either going to violate people's rights and hinder, or you're going to give up freedom for safety, or that bill is going to, if you're going to give up freedom for safety, it's either going to grow government and its power, or it's going to secure rights. There's no gray. You can have a lot and a little in that, but those are always the issue. Always. It's never not about that. And so that makes it quite simple when you're dealing with it. But when these legislators are passing laws, the beauty of a jury, and this is every jury, and whether a state wants to recognize it or not, you can look up in the history of juries and when that came about. And you can see that juries many times were sequestered and they were held even against their will to come up with a verdict against, for, or against anybody. And, there's a strategy in government for having the people be on juries, is because then that way the government doesn't have to be responsible for causing the mayhem and the calamity in people's lives. The king has allowed the people to convict each other. That's kind of crazy, but that is what it is. A jury of your peers, however you want to define that. Okay, we can talk about that when we talk about more about juries. So, but the beauty of a jury, and maybe a judge might not let you know this, and it doesn't, listen carefully what I'm going to say. It doesn't matter what a judge thinks or feels. The judge is a public servant, and the judge has one stupid job in the courtroom, and that's to serve the people, not himself or anything. And a court, it belongs to the people, does not belong to the judge. How arrogant. And when people stood and rose, all rise, they're rising for judges now, but in the past, it was because the judge brought the Bible above his head and he carried it in. They were rising for the word of God and for the scriptures or the divine or whatever you want to call. If he's coming in to secure rights, because that's his only job. The only purpose of a just government, every aspect of a government, is to secure rights and nothing else. And any judge that doesn't recognize that is not worth the hem of his stupid robe or her robe. But it's the people. If you want to stand for people coming into the court, stand up for the jury coming into the court who are going to judge the case and the law. And that's the part they don't like, is that the jury's going to judge the law. Is this law just? Does this law violate rights? That's the job of the jury. And they don't have to have any qualifier at all. The jury is bound by their conscience and not even the Constitution. Because listen, evil people can pass amendments to constitutions and have them in law and still violate people. But the jury, by their own conscience before God, can has the authority to say, I will not convict. And without the one juror can lock up a jury and not have it be unanimous. That requires them to deliberate and to talk and to engage. And sometimes these days, judges are doing mistrial when a jury doesn't give the judge what the judge wants. Might call it a mistrial. Now, either party can call for a mistrial, because if the judge doesn't make sure rights aren't violated, when you're appealing in a court, you're not appealing your case. Your case is tried in some capacity or it plays out. Usually when you appeal, you're appealing with how the judge handled the case, and that's what the appeal is all about, because you're not doing you're not trying the case again. Okay, but you can see many times, in order to find a conviction, that they'll keep doing mistrial until they finally get the kind of outcome they want. That is communistic, and that is bad. So all those things are playing out in court. Of course, there's two types, whether it's criminal in nature, and of course, if it's civil, if there's a jury involved. And typically juries are involved when there's a certain amount of money involved. And I don't know that it has to be a lot, but that's, I think, the way these court rules are these days, or it should be statute and code. One of the things I want to mention about juries is there are petite juries, which those juries are the ones that judge a case. And of course, again, the case in the law. Then there's the grand juries that are looking at evidence and facts and things to determine if there's enough evidence to bring something to trial. And that's what a grand jury does. And of course, a grand jury has a foreman or a lead juror who facilitates the grand jury. And the bad thing about that is that they're not educating people, young people in school, high school, about how to be on a jury. Oh no, that's not important. The freaking life of somebody. And that's the kind of freaking education the stupid government public education delivers to the table. Not knowing a clue how to be on a jury and what its purpose is to secure the rights of people. 18, you can be on a jury. There you go. But then again, at 18, it's 35 for a president, but 18 or whatever, you can be elected representative. You don't have to know a stit about anything. Of course, most of these idiots that are in there, many of them are attorneys. So you just have these lawyers lawyering in government, and it's just a stinking mess. And many of them there get in there for just to benefit financially, and they do. And you know how they benefit financially? It's called insider trading. It's legal when you're elected representative. You affect the markets. You know what you're going to do. You bet against or for whatever you're going to do. Bada bing, money. No criminal activity there, huh? But anyway, so the jury judges the case and the law. There was some court activity in the South where someone was being tried on, cannabis or marijuana charge, and they couldn't convict. They couldn't get a conviction in this particular area because nobody figures marijuana should be illegal. And that's the way they do it. And then when you look at O.J. Simpson, many people believe he was guilty of murder. Look, the police were harming the people of LA for so long. They were disgusted with how they handled the case. And OJ was their man, and they just acquitted him. And that's the power of it. That's common law, even if it's unjust. Sad to say, not a big fan of common law. But the idea is it's another form of construct. But But the idea is that the jury was there to, to be the will of the people. Um, so how do we get people into the jury? How can we get people in that? What's typical is there'll be a particular court case, and then you'll have demonstrators and people active in a particular case, and then they'll want to. This is what they call it. They want to, um, deal with the jury. They call that jury tampering. And so the judge is watching whether people are jury tampering or trying to get information to a juries and all that, and it's illegal. So the worst thing you can do, and maybe it's out of desperation, is to be down at the courthouse trying to persuade jurors. You want to be at the polls where they're electing people and get those people, because those are where the juries are coming from. Or you want to get that database and go and find out and have classes in your local area. Now, there is a website, and we'll put it up somewhere on here. It's called FIJA, the Fully Informed Jury Association. And I think it's FIJA.org. But they have all the history and the support for juries so that they can be knowledgeable. If you want, we have on our website a little packet there. I think we sell them for $5 or something like that. It's a jury. It's called the Citizens Guide, I think. You can reach out to State Citizen at destinationfreedom.org and look for how you can get that. We'll send you a link, and then we'll mail it out. Be sure that you include where you want us to mail it to, because someone paid for a jury's guide, and we got the payment, but I have no way of connecting and finding out who they are so I can mail them their guide. I'll wait. It'll show up. Someone will say, hey, I paid for that and never got it. Like, okay, thanks. Give me their address. So help us out with that. We'll be glad to send that guide out. And it's really inexpensive, but it's a wonderful tool. But anyway, getting back to finding jurors, if you're interested in that, then let us know. We'll give you a lot of support. And if you're going to come up with a plan for your state, that'll be awesome. That you will change the history of where you live in your state by doing just that alone. You'll bring justice. And if you have freedom-minded people on juries, that's a completely different kind of jury. I remember one of the things about not being a federal citizen in New Hampshire, in order to be, according to the judges, in order to be a jury, you have to be a federal citizen, and I'm not. So when I had a weird experience, I was trying to get the court to give me the definition of a term United States in the jury questionnaire. They refused. They didn't want to do that. They said I could ask the judge. And I remember being in the, moving towards the courtroom, getting jury instructions, all that, not qualified yet as a juror, haven't answered all the questions on the jury questionnaire. And I get in the courtroom. I'm in the courtroom. The plaintiff or, the defendant is in the courtroom selecting his jury. And I get pulled and I'm selected to be on this jury. And the judge is saying, is there any reason why you can't be on this jury? And I stood up and said, I'm not yet qualified as a juror. And then he says, well, do you want to be on the jury? And I said, that's not relevant. Because listen, people are subpoenaed. They are compelled to be on jury. They're not doing jury duty because they feel like it. It's a duty that's imposed on people. So it wasn't relevant. I had not been qualified as a jury. Then he told me I was excused. And so he has no authority to excuse me. Only if I was selected to be a juror could he excuse me. Just crazy. So I went back out to the clerk and said, listen, I'm not coming down here to do this again. I need that term defined so I can answer the question. So eventually I wrote to the court and told them that the State Department defines U.S. citizen or defines a U.S. citizen by the 14th Amendment. And the court said, that's how we define citizenship, is by the 14th Amendment. And then I had to disqualify myself. So then as soon as I did that, I got on and contacted one of my state reps and said, the court just violated my duty. What are you going to do about it? And you know what he did? Nothing. I won't mention his name. Useless. I've known a number of legislators that are useless. Males. no testicles, unfortunately. Sad. Good people on some level, but unfortunately not patriot enough, so. And listen, in the big guise of freedom, if you don't have the nads or the ovaries to say no in a given government situation, I promise you, you'll never shoot anybody in like a freedom movement kind of thing, like the founders did in the Village Green. If you can't start by saying resisting tyranny in your own life of saying, I refuse to do this or that, you will never defend liberty and freedom by force. Never happen. Don't have that same courage. And so a lot of times people have administrative work, which isn't, you're not risking your life. You're just writing words. But if you're not even willing to do that, you won't defend liberty by the Second Amendment or anything like that. That's just fantasy, So jury instruction is important. And so learn about it, understand it historically and the value of it. It is profound because no matter how they pass laws in the House, whether that's US or federal, no matter how they pass laws, the jury is going to check it at the end and say, no deal. And a judge that says, I'm going to tell you what the law is, and that's fine. He can tell you what the law is so that you can tell him that you're going to nullify it. But he can't tell you or she can't tell you what you can cast in your vote. That is called jury tampering. And sometimes judges do that. And then the other subject matter that I think is vital, and that is about the sheriff. And so I remember two sheriffs were running against each other in where I'm in my county, So I went up to both of them. There was a particular event at that time of that last election, if I remember correctly. I was selectman in our town, and we couldn't find a police chief. Nobody would volunteer to be the police chief. We had $950,000. No, that's not right. 95. It's almost $100,000. That's $95,000 for a police department. But a sheriff wants a good chunk of that, so it doesn't really work really well. So anyway, one of our options was to have the county sheriff and the deputies, because we're in the county, patrol our town because they're supposed to, and so we could actually pay them more to patrol more. And they may even get another deputy just to patrol the town more. And that's an interesting thing. And I learned about that, at least how our town does it, when I became selectman in my town. That's like a town council. So when the two sheriffs got to come talk to us as councilmen, and I remember asking him, I always ask every elected official this question, and that is this: what do you feel is the number one rights violations going on in the town, the county, the state, America? Ask the person running for office, what do they think is the number one rights violation going on? Let them tell you. Listen. And when they tell you, then ask them what they're doing about it. And then you can determine whether you want to support them or not. And the one sheriff, I asked him, I said, what do you think of the number one rights violation going on in the county? He's like, see, you didn't understand my question. No one asks questions about rights. And he says, do you mean law enforcement if they're violating people? I said, I don't know. Do you feel that that's a big issue in our county? And he's like, well, not necessarily. So he didn't really get the question, but it let me know he has not a clue, doesn't know what rights are. And listen, you can't hold against him. He's not educated, doesn't know rights, not an attorney. He's just a cop. And so many of these sheriffs are just cop. I was in the military, cop. I did all this military. I was in Afghanistan. I was in Iraq, Desert Storm, all that crap. Doesn't know a thing about rights. And listen, military people, I certainly can't judge all military people, but a hell of a lot of military people think they're securing liberty and freedom when they're nothing but promoting deep states ideas. They're promoting the military industrial complex or whatever the CIA or whatever these governments are doing around the world. That's what they're securing. No rights. Whose rights? Are they violating the rights of the people where they're invading or bombing or whatever? Not those people's rights. Wouldn't know a right if it hit them in the head. Of course, that's not everyone, But my word, come home and secure rights against our overreaching government. Do that. I support that. I support our military to come home and defend America. I believe they should be very strong to defend America, not invade countries. That's just bull crap. It's evil. And some military people don't have a clue. They're there because they can get a college degree. They're there because they want to learn something so they can make money when they get out. Hey, that's good luck with that. Hope you don't die. But anyway, back to the sheriff. Okay. Know who your sheriff is. He says he represents you. So have him in your cell phone. Every elected rep that says they volunteer to serve you, you should know what their number is. It should be in your cell phone. And you should at least talk to them once so that you can ask them some questions. They should know who you are, because most people don't ask them questions about liberty and freedom, but it's that important, So come up with a plan on how you can win your sheriff. Now in New Hampshire, we only have 10 counties. We only have 10 positions, 10 sheriffs in our county. And listen, there was over 100,000 people that voted for Ron Paul in 2008. If we can't get sheriffs elected, that's just sad. And listen, there's some freedom organizations out that like Restore America or whatever it is. None of that's going to work. Why? Because people have force behind what they've chosen. So if you want to promote some idea, something in your state, win your sheriff so your sheriff can be on board. Let that person be a freedom person that supports freedom ideas. And so that's what I really wanted to talk about. So I'm going to get into answering some questions on the chat. But those are two things that every freedom organization should support, the efforts of securing liberty and freedom. Because remember, the sheriff is elected directly to the people. The jury serves the people. And that's why they're so profound and so important, So let's take a look at some of these questions on here. Let me see if I can see them all. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Oh, there we go. All right. Let's see. Someone asked, let me see, I'm a little bit bottom. Someone said the 14th Amendment created a condition of voluntary servitude. However, I think maybe you mean involuntary servitude, but I think it's voluntary. However, you can gain your freedom by opting out. Well, of course. People, you're constantly asked, are you a U.S. citizen? If you don't know what the definition of the term United States, then you don't know what kind of citizen that you're volunteering for. If that definition of that term United States is the District of Columbia, which most of the time it is, you're saying that you're a citizen of the District of Columbia. That's a federal 14th Amendment citizen. And so, that's it's important to know. You can't just do a blanket no, because it's different in any given situation. You're asked that in many different scenarios. Most of the time, I feel safe that the ones asking are the ones that are creating those tax liabilities and such as that. Someone said this, John here, he says, the Bible states that if you can be free rather. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. I mean, that's the journey. Freedom is on the inside. Liberty's on the outside. Okay. The government violates your liberties. The government can't touch the freedom you have inside in your heart and in your mind. Okay. That's based upon truth and how much truth you seek after and want to have in your heart. That freedom is the relationship that you have with your creator or your God in that capacity. Then depending upon how that relationship plays out will depend upon how vibrant your life is. So that's the work you have to do inside. And if you haven't, or you don't do that work, then you're not very free. You may have a form of freedom, but it wouldn't be the fullness of what you could have inside you. On here says, hey there, this just popped up on my homepage. What do you guys do? Well, I'm Christopher. I secure liberty and freedom for our clients, Americans worldwide. And so I'm a freedom consultant. I care about securing people's rights. I am not an attorney, not a lawyer. And so I don't have such limitations. So many times we're helping people deal with their governments. And we want to always make sure that they're not coming into those jurisdictions, or that they determine how much they want to interact with their government on whatever level that is. So John says, can we break from the current feudal system? Well, there's different aspects of that. As far as an income tax liability, of course, you can choose not to be a federal citizen. That's a U.S. person. That's a citizen of the District of Columbia. And then that also is resident aliens. So if you're either of those, you have an income tax liability by your choice. You have filled out paperwork saying that you are that type of citizen or resident. So you can make that change. Taxes are always compelled and are enforced under pain of death, all taxes without exception. If you owe a tax, you got to pay it, unless you're going to determine that the tax is immoral, and then you might resist it, or you might come into another way. Now, taxes are always by consent, okay? And it's challenging because if your parents were communists, you might have taxes that you don't want. You get to play that out. There are remedies in the law. There's remedies in the constitutions for making those changes. And so, but it's amazing is that you do have choices, because here's the reason that people, or that the founders enjoyed excise taxes. Excise taxes were privileges in which you could choose not to take or do or have the government serve you in some capacity. Therefore, you don't have to pay the tax if you don't take what the government's offering. That's an excise tax. And the Supreme Court has already ruled that the federal income tax is an excise tax. So you have a choice. And there's more freedom in being able to choose not to be taxed because you're making a different choice of whatever government's offering. A direct tax doesn't give you that much latitude or freedom, and it has to be the same for everyone. They call that, it has to be apportioned, and the Constitution talks about that. And so it's a big equalizer. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It's the same tax. And percentages are not the same as apportioned. If it's a $10 tax, it's 10 for the rich or for the poor. Now, a lot of communists don't like that because they don't like the idea that the rich easily can pay $10 and the poor can't. But there's an equality in that. Because listen, no matter whether someone's rich or poor, a stamp costs the same amount of money. You know, it doesn't recognize what your financial status is. And so that plays out that way. But when you're talking about feudal system, if income tax is one of those ways where people are working for the government and they're not taking home all their money. But one of the biggest aspects of the feudal system is real estate law, and how bankers have come in. They've brought the feudal system back, where rents are being collected on these properties. That is pure feudalism. And if you look at real estate law, it reads as feudalism. And America's adopted that. America's a communist country. How do I know? It's adopted all 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. How can you say America's not a communist country if they've adopted all 10 planks? So you can call yourself a meatball, but if inside you're just, a nut, it's still going to be a nut on the inside, regardless of what's on the outside. Okay. It's still the same, so if you have, it's just bad, but that's because Americans don't know what communism is, and they don't even know that they want to avoid that. But that is the nature of the way life is in America. And listen, as you know, many times I talk about, I personally believe that the federal government, generally speaking, I'm not saying this about all state governments, but the federal government is upholding the Constitution in the things they're doing. And they're typically in these states because they're handing out money. And if the state takes it, then the state is the one that's harming you and bringing the feds in. But the idea is that the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 has given the federal government to have exclusive legislative authority in all cases whatsoever in their jurisdiction, and they do. And they govern every aspect of life for these federal citizens and resident aliens. Sad to say, the Constitution has given them that. That is sad. So in the states, they don't have that authority. but most people wouldn't recognize the difference between state governments being separate from the U.S. federal government. If attorneys many times don't know it, what hope does it that the people will know it? I mean, not every doctor believes that your body can heal itself and just needs to be set. Your diet's important. All most doctors are taught to just be drug dealers or cut out the offending organ. Sad to say. So just because you have a great an education doesn't mean it's a great education. So anyway, so that's some of that. Looks like we're good. I can't tell how many people are on for this call. I'm glad you hung in there if you did. And I'm glad that you're on. And I hope this blessed you. Hope it inspired you to do something in the freedom movement. If this helped you to move to the next thing or inspired you to get involved with us or whatever you want to do, just write something in the comments below. I'd love to see your sentiment. And I'll look through there and see if I can give you a thumbs up or acknowledge a great thing that you're saying. So I thank you for that. And I thank you for being on tonight. I'm glad you're here. Next week, we're going to deal with dealing with fear and how you relate to government and who you are and all that stuff. I'm going to have a special guest on, a client who's done some of our process, and she's going to have a great sentiment about how she worked through getting to where she is and what we're doing. So, all right. I'm Christopher Gronsky. This is destinationfreedom.org. I'm glad you were on. We'll see you next time. Take care.